Hi, welcome to Millennium. Today on Millennium, we will honor the Marine Corps 2nd Raider Battalion, the Marine Raider Battalion that made the first offensive move on Makin Island with an attack via submarine. This 2nd Raider Battalion or regiment was under the command of General Carlson. General Carlson was a more or less what we call an old breed Marine who had served in China and had more or less, he was far advanced, and he had adopted the guerrilla tactics of the Chinese, and he was the father, if you want to add, of guerrilla warfare as the United States Marines and the U.S. government know as it is today. Colonel Carlson came from a family, his father, oddly enough, was a minister, man of peace. However, Colonel Carlson decided that he would become a Marine. And of course, as all Marines, he served in World War I. He served in China when hostilities broke between the Chinese and the Japanese. He was very familiar with guerrilla tactics plus Japanese military tactics. And in such, he was a tactician. And so he became the commanding officer of the 2nd Raider Battalion and conducted the first offensive against the Japanese Imperial Army and Navy on Makin Island. And oddly enough, this campaign, or offensive, thrust America into the war full-handedly and put the Japanese on notice that the American Marines and Navy were no pushover, as they had thought due to the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, which they were victorious at. The raid was conducted by 2 submarines, and these submarines were the offensive, and they carried the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion, and the landing craft were rubber boats, and these rubber boats were huge. In most cases, they were colored black, and I trained on a few of them, and they were paddled. But on these rubber landing craft that were brought aboard the submarine and inflated on the decks of the submarine and more or less launched from the submarines with personnel, Marine Corps Raiders, these rubber boats were run with a motor. They all had motors. And that's how the landing started and occurred, and that's what put the Marines on the beach, was these rubber boats. And the aim was to destroy the Japanese installations and take prisoners, gain intelligence on the Gilbert Islands. And if you know the Gilbert Islands, they're right on the corner of the Solomons. And the intent of the American Marine Corps, or the Admiral Nimitz, was to more or less gain intelligence for the operation that would occur on Guadalcanal by the United States Marine Corps. And thus he had the raid on Makin Island. And oddly enough, they put the Japanese on notice, and they had to take and put a lot of soldiers, Imperial Japanese soldiers and Marines, on these islands where normally they would be able to use them in the campaign on Guadalcanal. They couldn't, because the Marine Corps Raiders had put them on notice that if they were to leave their flank exposed, the Marines would create a landing on the Gilberts. And the importance of the Gilberts Island was the fact that the United States Navy needed an airstrip. And eventually the airstrip became Tarawa, and that was another large battle of the Marine Corps, a 3-day battle where it was a bloody battle. A lot of Marines were lost. And oddly enough, the Japanese Imperial Marines that garrisoned Tarawa were from Kyushu, is the island, and the city is Sasebo. And that's where this detachment of Imperial Marines who defended Tarawa, they all came from that neighborhood. And right after the war, or up until and after the Korean War, you could see that many Japanese men of fighting age did not walk the streets of Sasebo. They were all dead. So they went on and they invaded the island, and the reason I'm bringing it up, it has a very, very touching story. And that's the purpose. I'd like to share this touching story with you, if I may, on the raid on Makin Island by the 2nd Raider Battalion. Now, this raid occurred in August 17/18, 1942. And it lasted for one day, 1.5 days. What we had was the Marine Corps were directed by Admiral Nimitz to raid Makin Island and to harass the enemy, the Japanese, take prisoners, and gather intelligence for the future campaign of Guadalcanal. During the summer of 1942, Admiral Nimitz decided to employ Carlson's battalion for its designated purpose. Planners selected Makin Atoll in the Gilbert Islands as the target. They made available 2 large mine-laying submarines, the Nautilus and the Aeronaut. Each one carried a company of raiders. The force would make a pre-dawn landing on Bertari Island, destroy the garrison, estimated at that time of 45 men. How they were surprised. The Marine Corps was very surprised. Withdraw that evening and land the next day on Little Makin Island. The scheduled D-Day was 17th August, 10 days after the 1st Marine Division and the 1st Raider assaulted the Lower Solomons. The objective of the operation were diverse, to destroy installation, take prisoners, gain intelligence in the area, divert Japanese attention and reinforcements from Guadalcanal, like I said, and Talagi. And Company A and B drew the mission, and the mission began to go badly at the beginning. The subsurfaced in heavy rain and high seas. Due to poor conditions, Carlson altered his plan at the last minute. Instead of each company landing on widely separated beaches, they would go ashore together. Lieutenant Oscar F. Pitos, a platoon commander, did not get the word. He and the squad in his boat ended up landing alone in what became the enemy rear. The main body reached shore in some confusion due to engine malfunctions and weather, then accidentally discharged weapons run any hope of surprise. And they knew they were coming. The raid went badly. The Marines contacted the submarine during the day and arranged an evening rendezvous off the entrance to the lagoon where there was no surface to hinder an evacuation. The men hauled 4 rubber boats along the island and arranged for the use of a native outrigger by 2300. The remainder of the landing force was back on board the Nautilus and the astronaut. Since the entire withdrawal had been so disorganized, the 2 companies were intermingled on the submarine, and it was not until they returned to Pearl Harbor, that they made an accurate accounting of their losses. The official tally was 18 dead, 12 missing. Only after the war would the Marine Corps discover that 9 of the missing raiders had been left alive on the island. These men had become separated from the main body at one point or another during the operation. With the assistance of the natives, the group evaded capture for a time, but finally surrendered on 30 August. A few weeks later, the Japanese Imperial Army, who had taken the prisoners, beheaded the 9 men on the island of Kwajalein. After the war, grave registration at the time, then and still is, was located in Hawaii. And each man that was buried in the Pacific, grave registration indicated the grave, and through the dog tags, the name, rank, and serial number of the dead. And this was forwarded to Hawaii and kept on file. After the war, the Army grave registration people looked up the records and noticed that there were 19 Marines buried on the island of Makin, and that these Marines had no idea where the graves were, because when Carlson had left, they had asked the natives to tend to the dead, and if they would arrange to bury them, being that they had no time to bury their dead. And the natives, fortunately, who were loyal to the United States, said they would. And they did. And they did. Now, they had to go and find out where they were buried, because nobody knew where they were buried. There were not markers where they were buried, because when they were buried, the Japanese occupied the island. And if they were to put up markers, the Japanese, in turn, would behead the people and the natives for burying the United States Marine Raiders. So what happened was the Marines went to the island, and the Army registration people went to the island, and they asked the natives if anybody knew where these young Marines were buried. Because the average age of these 19 Marines, 18 Marines, 19 Marines officially, was 18, 19. I think the oldest was 22, and they were led by an old man, Carlson, who at the time had to be in his 50s. but the average mean age of these youngsters, or young men I should add, was 18, 19 years old. They missed all that living. It's a shame. And my story began to be touching in the fact that nobody could remember, and the elder natives had all died off, and nobody could remember. And there was a young teenager at the time who was still alive in 1945-46, and he said that he thought he knew where all 19 were buried. So the Army informed the Marine Corps Commandant as to how, and at that time the Commandant was Commandant Holcomb. And they informed him, and he indicated that he would go to the island and we would pick up our dead. And he dispatched a C-47 with Marines, Honor Guard, and Marines to the island. And they disinterred all the Marines, and they gave them a proper presentation. In other words, by proper presentation, each Marine, each dead Marine, was placed in a coffin, and an American flag was draped over the coffin. After which, at the funeral and the interment in Arlington National Cemetery, a flag folded like this was presented to each and every family member from a grateful Marine Corps. And each family was given a flag of their nation. And as they were marching, well, let me explain it to you. What they did was they had a Marine Corps color guard, which consisted of the Marine Corps ensign, the United States flag, the flag of the American flag, and each flag was draped over the coffin. And as they loaded the colors and the bodies and coffins onto the C-47, the band, of course, was playing, and a native who never spoke English, this young teenager never spoke English, but as these men were loaded onto the plane and he was saying his adieu, he sang the Marine Corps hymn. Never spoke a word of English, but sang the Marine Corps hymn in English. A very moving and touching story. Now, I like to more or less read the names of the 19. They are Captain Gerald P. Holtom, California. Sergeant Clyde Thomas, Georgia. Fireman First Class Vernon L. Castle, Oklahoma, United States Navy. Corporal I.B. Earls, California. Corporal Daniel A. Gayson, Texas. Corporal Harris J. Johnson, Iowa. Corporal Kenneth K. Kinkle, Arkansas. Corporal Edward Maluski Chicago, Illinois. Corporal Robert P. Pearson, California. Mason Yarborough, Missouri. PFC Gallagher, Michigan. PFC Hicks, California. PFC Montgomery, Eden, Wisconsin, Kenneth. PFC Mortensen, Wisconsin. PFC Vandenberg, Wisconsin. Carlisle Larson, Minnesota. Robert B. Menning, California. Franklin N. Nolan, Iowa. And Charles A. Selby, Michigan. These were the names of the dead that are now buried in Arlington Cemetery. Now, I'd like to go into the state government and the abuses that have occurred in this present legislature in the last month and a half. And these abuses were voted on by our representative from the 16th District, Simsbury. They were voted on without any hearings. The gun bill that was passed, or gun control I should call it, was voted in the middle of the night without a hearing. It was given certification, which in all intensive purposes is a meaning that they don't want you to know about, so they call it certification, which means the law is passed and voted on in the affirmative without a hearing. Unheard of in the constitutional state. Unheard of. And the bill, the next violation of the state constitution, in my opinion, is the what I call the Newtown law, or laws. And that's the bill that was passed to more or less prevent people from getting death certificates. They wanted to prevent anybody who wanted a death certificate to find out how a person died. They wanted to more or less refuse to give them a death certificate. This was going to be controlled, in my opinion, was going to be controlled. Who else would control it? The police, the state police. We don't need a police state. We don't need a state police to tell us if we can get information or not. And in turn, that's what they came up with. And what they did here again in the dead of night, between 12 and 1 o'clock in the morning, as we all slept, they passed a bill called an act making technical changes to the statute concerning access to public records. And it was titled, the bill number was Senate Bill number 1149, an act making technical changes to the statutes concerning access to public records. What it all meant when you interpret this is that the Newtown law, as I'll refer to, was an attack on the Freedom of Information Act. An act that I'm proud of and the state of Connecticut should be very proud of, that states that if you want information and the town, state refuses to give you the information, that you can go to the Freedom of Information Commission and they can order the town or state to give you the information. This is what the governor, and it has to be laid at his doorstep, this is what Governor Malloy, the Democrat, wanted. And every Democrat in the State House of Representatives, our representative, John Hampton included, voted for this bill. They voted to take away your constitutional rights, freedom of speech, which is guaranteed in the Connecticut, in the Constitution of the state of Connecticut. It's guaranteed right here. And this governor, acting more and more as Huey Long of Louisiana did years ago, decided he was going to do away with the Information Act and that he was going to pass a law preventing you from getting information, which is wrong. Every citizen in Simsbury or the state of Connecticut, or the nation for that matter, has a right of information. We have a right to know it. We should know it. We have a right to question our government. So they passed 1149. Then, to confuse us even further, what they did was they passed an amendment. And the amendment was called LCO number 8864. So the average person who had little knowledge of state law would have no idea what they were talking about. That's what the intention was. And the governor, who's a lawyer, knew what he was doing. He wanted to confuse us, divide us, and pass this bill. Here again, the Newtown bill, the Anti-Freedom of Information Act bill, was passed by a lawyer. Governor Malloy is a lawyer, a member of the Connecticut Bar. And that was an act making changes concerning public records. And that's what he did to change it. Now, I wish I had more time to point out in the Constitution of the state of Connecticut, the inequities of our representative from Simsbury, John Hampton, the Democrat, and our governor, Malloy, a Democrat, in taking away our constitutional rights. We have a right to know. We have a right to free speech. And how are we going to have checks and balances on our government when we have people like John Hampton in the Connecticut legislature, the House of Representatives, who votes for these anti-constitutional bills? Scandalous. Scandalous. You can't write your representative because he voted against you, so he's not going to listen to you. But you do have a choice, and that will be on Election Day. Thank you for allowing me to come into your homes. And I hope you enjoyed today's program and the respect that the Makin Island natives paid to our United States Marines. In many cases, they gave them more respect than they received from their own United States citizens and officials. Thank you for allowing me into your homes. God bless.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.